This is a recording of the Kansas City Secular AA Speaker Meeting held every Saturday night at 7 o'clock p.m. at HJ's Youth and Community Center, 6425 Warner Road, Kansas City, Missouri. This is episode 17, and our speaker is Marley P.
Welcome to the Secular Speaker Meeting. I'm Simon, and I'm an alcoholic. Our secular group attempts to maintain a tradition of free expression and to conduct a meeting where all may feel free to express any doubts or disbeliefs that they may have and to share their own personal form of spiritual experience, their search for it or the rejection of it. In keeping with AA tradition, we do not endorse or oppose any form of religion or atheism. Our only wish is to help those who want recovery without having to accept anyone else's beliefs or having to deny their own. During the meeting, I'll pass around a basket if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, coffee or rent or, well, anything else. We'd appreciate it, but it's not necessary. We'll begin the meeting with a speaker, and we'll go around and talk about it. If you have got any questions for Marley, you can ask them then. If you'd like to talk about your own thing that's on your mind, you're welcome to do that. This is an open meeting, so not all of us here are necessarily alcoholics, and if you've got anybody in your life or anybody in the community that's interested by us or curious about this process, they're more than welcome. We also broadcast this online as a podcast, so if you get the microphone and you don't want to be on the podcast, you can just pass the microphone on, turn it off, or you don't have to say anything at all if you wouldn't like to, and just pass it on to the next person. You can listen to the past podcasts at secularaaspeaker.org. John just let me know this afternoon that our listeners shot way up. We had 700 or 500 this last month. Yeah, total of 1,500. So we almost doubled our total listeners in 1 month. I think that takes care of all of the regular business. Marley, you want to take it from here?
Hi, I'm Marley. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Marley.
I guess I'll start in the beginning. I grew up in Shawnee, Kansas. My mom still lives in my childhood home. I was a weird kid. I've grown into a weird adult. Independent, I guess is a good word for it. I had a very two-sided childhood. There were parts of my growing up that were wonderful and free, and I played outside and I lived outdoors and I had a wild imagination. And there were other aspects of it that were very lonely. I was a very lonely child. I didn't like other children. I loved children as an adult. But I didn't like other children. I didn't have the patience for them. I thought they were silly. Which is what children are, but I enjoyed spending time with adults. As Wes put in an earlier episode, I am an heirloom alcoholic. It comes to me naturally from both sides of the family. And so I grew up around addiction. I saw it. It affected my life. It affected any sense of stability. And I think as an adult, that is one of the reasons why I am so focused on attaining stability. It's like one of my ultimate goals is just being. And parts of it were really idyllic. I was a free range child. Out on a bike, bye mom, see you later. Outside playing with neighborhood kids. I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the 80s. Grew up in the 90s. And there were parts of it that were really good. My dad is an alcoholic. He's currently killing himself with alcohol. I have not spoken to him in 16 years, 2002. And we had a very tough relationship even as a child. My parents divorced when I was 6. And that was difficult. When my parents got divorced, it wasn't as common as it is now. And so it was like me and like 4 other kids in school, like in this special little like divorce counseling group. And kids were mean about it back then because I didn't have a family that was normal. And I continued to not have any sort of normal looking family growing up. I'm very close with my mother, but my father was wildly verbally and emotionally abusive. To be honest, I was afraid of him as a kid. I spent a lot of time growing up hiding, behind couches, under coffee tables, just wanting to be invisible. And I think that want to be invisible has infected my whole adult life because it's hard to make connections when you don't want anybody to be able to see you. And that is tough. But it definitely I think growing up with that very two-sided Jekyll and Hyde life where, you spend a lot of time oh, everything's fine, everything's great. And hiding and lying about who my father was and trying to keep him from meeting people because he would lose his temper in public places. And that's incredibly embarrassing to watch an adult man have to be escorted out of a Kmart for getting into a fight with a guy in the toothpaste aisle. True story. And we were little kids. Or having to be in a Taco Bell and them shut it down because we didn't get our order. And it was just crazy. And he just started yelling and going crazy. And he got out and he parked the car in the middle of the drive-thru. And it was, it was stuff like that. And there were instances of my father doing that throughout my whole life. And it just increased that want of being invisible. And, but also because my father was so dogmatic and judgmental. An A wasn't good enough. Nothing was ever good enough. If it was an A, why wasn't it an A plus? I could never be successful to him. And so, I stopped showing him report cards as early as possible. And I would tell my mom, don't show him report cards. Because I was afraid of getting yelled at. I was afraid of, never being good enough. And that affects, that never being good enough has carried with me my whole life. It's just that little voice that lives in my head that if I got an A, why didn't I get an A plus? If I got a B, why didn't I get an A? It was just never, no matter what I did or how successful I was, I don't know. I just don't ever feel like I really am. Yeah. And I went to high school at Shawnee Mission North. I was Holly High School. I loved high school. I was active in theater and art and everyone knew me and I was friends with everybody and I was a peer mediator and it was top of the world for me, right? I went through a really angry phase in middle school and I grew out of that weird, angry ska kid and to a weird punk kid, but whatever. And I loved it. And my dad showed up once during a theater rehearsal and lost his shit. Brought a BB gun. He's a fucking idiot. Pardon my language. And it ruined that moment of really feeling great and just crushed everything because then everyone at school knew what a monster my dad was. The cops were called on him. He was banned from school. And it ruined that moment for me. But I got a way out. I was an exchange student my senior year of high school. I lived in Rome, Italy for a year. I learned Italian. I went to high school there. I finished high school there. And that was where, I'm finally getting to it, I was first introduced to alcohol. I was very like much a straight edge kid. No drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. I was never going to do any of those things. Because I'd grown up around them, I was afraid of them. I didn't want them to ruin my life. The irony is that now I'm sitting here and talking to you, but I was really afraid of them. And then I got to Italy, and Italians have a very different view of alcohol. It's very normal for people to drink there. Wine at dinner, younger people drink. I turned 18 there, which to them is the la maggiorità, which is the age of majority or like adulthood. It's like that's your big birthday there is 18. And we had a huge party. And that was the first time in my life I ever got drunk. Ever. And I think the only reason it sticks out to me is because I ran up and tackled this giant ape stuffed animal because I was drunk. And I didn't know I was drunk because we'd been drinking spumante because we were like, 18-year-olds. And I knocked over these red wax candles, and I spent like a week cleaning them out of all of my host mom's white upholstery. And that was like the first thing I did bad with alcohol. And I mean, I was a kid. I didn't know any better. And then I went to college, and I went to KU. I have a BFA in textile design from KU, and that was where I really started drinking. It was a normal part of college. I went to college in the early 2000s, and like that was just part of it. Like Thursday, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday fun day. Like you had 4 dedicated days a week to drinking. I didn't really drink my freshman year. I started doing I became like a massive pothead in my sophomore year of college. And that was kind of my drug of choice for the most part. That and like psychedelics were fun. And I had an alcoholic roommate my junior year of college, and that was really difficult. We turned 21 that year, and she developed a drinking problem. And she's sober now. She's wonderful. I adore her. Shout out if she listens to this. And I wanted to help her. I wanted her to get help. And like to protect her from herself. Because it wasn't fun coming home in the middle of the night because I worked overnights, which is how I met my best friend Becca. And I would worry that I would come home one morning at like 6 or 7 in the morning and she'd be dead in our apartment. And that was my first, after just growing up with my alcoholic dad, who I didn't understand when I was a kid that he was an alcoholic. It became more obvious when I got older. I think I just had kid blinders onto it. I thought dad was angry. I don't think I knew that it had anything to do with him imbibing. I never realized that. And, but I was really scared for her. And I remember driving into Kansas City and like sitting her parents down and asking them for help, because I didn't know what to do. And I was alone in this apartment with this girl that I couldn't protect from herself. And I was afraid was going to like aspirate their own vomit. I was afraid I was going to come home and she'd be dead. And because she had a couple of bad tumbles. And we ended up having a huge falling out in that process of living together and moving out. We had a huge falling out. And I felt really bad about it. And I said some really nasty things the last day of us moving out. And it took her a while after that to get help, the help she needed. And I'm really proud of her now. But and I think that made me really focus on like how much I was drinking too, like, because I would have moments, like I was always a problem drinker. Like when I would start drinking, there was never enough alcohol. Like I was just like shots and more shots and, just beer on beer on beer on beer. Like forever, but it would be like few and far between. Like I would only drink on like Friday night and that was fine, but it'd get I mean, just like wake up and be like, where the fuck am I? Or like, have my car keys taken away, or not be able to find my car the next morning because I parked it on the wrong street and somehow walked home. And then after college, I went to Tunisia, and expats are heavy drinkers. That's like that's what we do. You get together and you drink and you talk shit and you live that expat life. And alcohol, they have a more secular society, and so alcohol was readily available there, and it was cheap. Like 5 dinar for a bottle of wine, which was like $3.75, and it was pretty decent wine. We drank heavily there, we partied heavy there, because we made American style money in a country whose money was worth less. And I loved it there. I was there 2009 to 2011 and absolutely loved it there. But that was, I think, the beginning of my regular heavy drinking, but it was so normal that I didn't, like, there were jokes like, oh, Marley's an alcoholic. Like, I definitely had some scary moments of like waking up clutching money the next day, like drunk as a skunk because I fell asleep in the foyer because I couldn't figure out how to use my weird Tunisian keys. True story. But yeah, that's when it first got bad. They had a revolution there in January of 2011. And I experienced some trauma in that. I didn't realize I was experiencing trauma in that moment because I was so proud to be living there and watching this country like fight for rights that we just totally take for granted every day, and fall their dictator. Which also makes it really hard to now watch what's going on here in our current political climate, because it gives me weird deja vu. And it was a revolution. Like, we were out in the streets and we were protesting and watching protests and hiding from protests and trying to avoid, run-ins with the military or the police. And it kind of shut down everything for a while, and everybody became very focused on one common goal, which was getting rid of Ben Ali. And that was wonderful. But a revolution is also, it's a type of war. And low flying the helicopters, I speak English, still trigger me. Like, they still make me feel unsafe. I'm not very trusting of the police. It's just like, I just become very, because the police were the ones that were shooting at us, like, in the beginning. Like, they were attacking their own people until the military stepped in to protect us from the police. It was insane. And I think that when I came back from Tunisia, because I left not because it was time or not because I wanted to, I left because I didn't feel safe anymore. And that was my rule. I told my mom, I will come home when I don't feel safe. And I came back to Kansas City, like, hell-bent on, like, I'm going to make a life here. And I was working service industry, and that was, heavy drinking's normal for that. When you work 4 p.m. to 2 a.m., like, let's get fucked up. Along with regular drug use and drinking, it was just a totally normal part of my life for a long time. And I think I stayed in that lifestyle for longer than I would have had I not been an alcoholic, but because it was so easy to hide that I was an alcoholic. Because, you get a shifty and then you stay and you have a couple more and then you drive home. I was a notorious drunk driver. I don't know how I didn't get at least one DUI. I should have. I deserved a lot more. And I did that, and it I just normalized it. It became so normal. And I'm a very private person. It's really hard for me to talk about myself. It's not that I'm not truthful. I'm selectively honest. I think people get to know what they need to know, and then they don't really need to know it if I don't want them to. Kind of thing. And my nephew got really sick, and I would say that is when the real downhill started. Yeah. My nephew was diagnosed with pediatric leukemia. He had AML. He was diagnosed when he was 3.5. And it broke my world. It broke my world. I was really angry when he got diagnosed. I'd also been helping my friend Lacey take care of her boyfriend at the time, but fiance James, who had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And when Maddox got sick, James had just come off his second bone marrow transplant, and he was in remission. And so I had like 4 months. I'd been back 2 years, and we'd had like 4 or 5 months of remission, and we were celebrating that, right? Because it was 2 years up to that point of James being sick. He had his first bone marrow transplant, and he was in remission when I came back from Tunisia in 2011. And when I met him, and his cancer came back, and they did a second bone marrow transplant. And I was around for that one. And I would go over there and I would stay with them, and I would help with their dogs and their cats and help take care of him. And they were also my friends. She was my best friend from high school, and I'd just come off of like my life was cancer for 2 years, and I thought I was free. And then my life became cancer again, and I was fucking livid. Not because Maddox himself was sick. It was not him. Of the unfairness of it all. Because how do you explain to a 3-year-old that they have blood cancer? How do you tell a child who cannot speak that they have cancer? It was unfathomable. I just couldn't get it. I made him a coloring book. That's how I explained it to him. But because AML is incredibly aggressive and it has a very high mortality rate, Maddox was in the hospital 4 to 5 weeks on for chemo, and then recovery from chemo. And then he'd be out for about 5 days. And I would stay at the hospital. I would visit at least 4 days a week, and then at least 2 nights, sometimes 3, I would sleep at the hospital with him. And I kind of took over. I barked orders. Like, I was very much like, this is how we're doing it. This is what we're doing. This is when we're doing it. We're going to split shifts. And that's how I take care of things. I become like hyper-focused. And then when he would go home for a week, I would go on a bender. And I mean, I would drink in between, but when you're so focused on this little life that you don't want to lose, I didn't do it, and then it just would creep in. And then Maddox went into remission, and James got really sick again. And I continued drinking heavily. Like any time I could, I was at my local watering hole drinking. And drinking at home and drinking on my own, and still, doing drugs. And James got sick for the last time, and I moved in the fall, and I didn't leave. And he went up, and he had some final treatments. And at a certain point, we kind of knew that Hodgkin's lymphoma was going to kill him. And when you're watching somebody you love die slowly, there's you experience what's called anticipatory grief. And he ended up passing away. And grief is really hard. Everybody grieves really differently. Lacey and I definitely did. I went to ground. And I became really reclusive, and I spent a lot of time alone. And I just like lived in that sadness. And in that sadness was a lot of heavy drinking by myself. I moved out, I got my own apartment, and that's the easiest thing in the world. I live alone. So I might have 3 or 4 drinks with my friends, and then I Irish exit, and then I would go home and stay up all night and smoke weed and drink. To the point where like I was probably still drunk in the mornings a lot. And, you know, I had like a pharmacy in my purse of Dramamine and Pepto, and some ibuprofen to keep me going. One of those and a Gatorade, like that's all you need to like right your balance. And I started to notice that my life was becoming unmanageable. And I knew I had known for a long time that I was a functioning alcoholic. Like, haha, that's funny. And then it became more and more clear to me that I was becoming what I didn't want to become, which was my father. I didn't want to waste my life because I had to drink to make it livable. I didn't want to become that. And I walked into the little AA hall on 80th Street and knocked on the door, and they made fun of me. They did. It was a couple of nice old men, and they were like, "Oh, she knocked on the door and she used the front one." Welcome. And my first AA meeting ever was a group of sweet middle-aged ladies who took me in, and they did a first step meeting with me. And they did it with only women, and they all went around and they shared their story, and they all cried. I did not cry at my first AA meeting. I was so ready to be done drinking. I was so just like, I'm in it. Like, I'm in it. I had a bender on Sunday night. I went in on Monday, and I was done, and I was ready. And as we went around, they shared their stories and what led them to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was really just great to know that I was going to be okay in that moment, that I was making a decision to better myself, and I was going to be okay. I was always like a high bottom drunk, I guess. We don't really use those terms in our groups because they're kind of dumb. Like they're stupid. Because like, what does that mean? Like, okay, it does mean something. Like I was just like a good enough liar that I never fucked anything up. And I don't know, but they were really sweet, and I really struggled with traditional AA. I am a card-carrying, proud, militant atheist. I have been since I saw the made-for-TV version of Lassie and learned what that word meant by looking it up in the dictionary. Stuck with it since elementary school, and I haven't let it go. And it's important to me. It's a very important facet of my life. I do not believe in God. I do not believe in life after death. I believe that this is my shot. This is my one chance. And I didn't want to do it drunk anymore. And I Googled around, and I found out that there was secular AA. And I mentioned it at one of the 80th Street meetings that I thought I would go to secular AA. And this guy was like, don't meeting hop. Like, meeting hop is how you fail at sobriety. You shouldn't meeting hop. Like, you can get over the God thing. Like, it's fine. We all do. And I was like, no, like I'm not going to get over the God thing. I don't believe in God. Like, this is not helpful. And so my first meeting was at St. Andrews, and I walked in, and Jack was there, and Kevin was there, and Jim was there, and Richard. and they were so nice. And Wes showed up late, and I only remember this because he walked in, and like I was talking, and then I said something about, because he asked like, oh, how'd you find out about us? Because he's always like the first person to greet anybody. And I was like, yeah, but I was told not to come here because I was told not to meeting hop. And he's like, well, I'm glad you did. And I never went back there. And I've been with you all ever since. Today is 1 year and 11 months for me. And thank you. And I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to hit the 2-year mark because I can't wait to say that I have been sober 4 years. Even though it's only 2 of them, it's only 2. I still get to say 4 years, and that makes me proud. I haven't struggled. I haven't relapsed. This is my first go, and I hope only go. I was talking to my mom. I went to Las Vegas a couple of weekends ago for a wedding, and I don't drink and I don't gamble. And Las Vegas sort of represents like everything I disagree with in life. Gratuitous like waste for one. It's just and can speak like just it's nothing for me in Las Vegas. But my mom said something when we were talking, and she was like, and I really liked it. And she was like, you've gone too far to go back. Like, you've worked too hard. Like, just stay on the path you're going. You've worked too hard. Because I mentioned to her, I was like, the only thing I miss about drinking is like a glass of champagne at a wedding. That's the one thing I'm like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. But I can survive without the champagne. Because I'm in a much better place now. And AA has been so helpful in reevaluating my relationships with other people, reevaluating like my effect on others, focusing on relationships that are important to me, to reciprocity, to grace. I'm really obsessed with the concept of grace, which is a whole nother talk. Have I been talking too long? And I've been really grateful to have this. And I know that I can be a wishy-washy attendee. I kind of come when I need it, and sometimes I need it when I don't come. In fact, sometimes when I really need to go to AA are the times when I avoid it the hardest. And it's usually because I'm dealing with something I don't want to talk about, and I don't want to walk into a room and mention something because I don't want to be honest about it yet. Like, I can be really stubborn in that sense, but I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you guys. And that's awesome. I love the sense of community that we built and how accepting we are. And I think it's been amazing. Like, I think one of the things I was most afraid of when I started going to AA is because I worked with kids at the time, full time. And I was afraid of being doxxed. I was afraid of somebody calling and saying, hey, like, there's this alcoholic in my AA group and she works with kids. Like, I was really afraid of that. And that couldn't be like that was just like the dumbest thing to ever be afraid of. But it was something that I was really afraid of. And now I'm really proud about it. Like, I tell people I'm a recovering alcoholic. I don't drink. Like, I don't care. I don't hide it. I'm proud of my success in it. It's really hard because it's so like heavy drinking and binge drinking, especially for my generation, older millennials, is so commonplace. And it's just part of that culture that when you are the one that doesn't drink, it's like, well, why the fuck not? Like, why don't you drink? And nobody should have the right to ask you that question. Like, it's okay that I don't drink. It's not okay that you ask why. And B, it's my choice. And C, like, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I don't want to. I don't mind being around booze. I don't mind going to bars. It doesn't bother me. I can smell it. It's fine. I've kind of done like a weird internal like aversion therapy to it, where like I kind of fixate on like annoying drunk behaviors. And they just like disgust me, and it just like helps me with the whole like, I don't want to be that person again. I had, and it's funny, and I think I had it last night because I was going to speak today and I was nervous about it. I had a drunk dream, which I went on a crazy bender last night, guys, in my head. And I was like, I was a monster when I would drink. I was a monster. I could be very, very mean when I was drunk. I was a very mean drunk. I was very fun sometimes, but I have no impulse control. I have no fear button, which is why I lived through a revolution and didn't think twice about leaving. I don't have a fear button. And so that button, when I would drink, would just go off. And so like any sort of like, this is an appropriate boundary to have, or like, maybe you shouldn't scale that fence and like enter that condemned building, like those thoughts were gone. And so I was very impulsive, and I would do very dangerous things. I have MDD, major depression, and I think that doesn't help with the impulse control. And so, yeah. And now here we are. Here we are today. That's what I got. I'm sorry that it was very like non-linear. So.
Thank you, Marley. I guess I don't know what it is about champagne that you like most, but I used to bartend weddings, and there was often somebody who would bring a, secret bottle of non-alcoholic something that I'd pour for them all night long.
Aww.
Yeah. Thanks for coming to talk.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Would you like to start the... All right.
I'm Kana. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Kana.
Thank you, Marley, for coming and sharing your story. It was really interesting, and I'm glad to hear it. You have this energy that's always so great to be around, and I love it when you come to meetings and I get to hear what you have to say. And also, I think your sobriety date is on my birthday, so I'm going to remember
April
it.
23rd?
Yeah.
Oh!
Yeah. So,
Yay!
yeah, I will
Birthday
always
twins!
remember. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like my
real
birthday. Yeah. So it's, yeah. But yeah, I'll always remember. It'll be like, Marley again. So,
I love it.
yes. All right. And I will pass with that.
Thanks.
And now I'll never forget your birthday.
I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, John.
I don't really have anything intelligent to say, but thank you so much for sharing your story. I really enjoyed every minute of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You don't have to speak if you don't want to.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I appreciate listening to your story.
Oh, thank you for being here.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. This is my first time ever being in this kind of a meeting, and it's an experience, and I'm really a good experience. Okay, I'm making this awkward. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We can fix it in post.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being here.
Sorry.
I love it.
I'm Deborah, a recovering addict.
Hi, Deborah.
I just, Marley, thank you. I really appreciate you dug really deep, and you were so authentic with your experiences. And it's what when I wasn't around AA, that's the music that I missed. That's exactly the music I missed. Two things. I love the fact that there's somebody out there that might listen to this that knew you, that you're really excited about where you both are. It's a beautiful thing. And I love the fact that your friend is here, wondering what to make of it all, because that's where we've all been wondering. We're still wondering what to make of all this, I think. The thing that really struck me in your story was that it's probably just where I am now. I'm just listening for what keeps us doing this, around all the various bad influences on us. And you just said, this is my one shot at it, whatever we believe. I don't know that I have any clear idea what I do believe, or don't believe. And it really is. There's just one shot at it. It's right now. Mm-hmm. And I know that I really do appreciate not feeling like shit all the time.
Exactly.
That's sometimes on the very, like lowest of the low, like what's the reason to keep doing this? Well, I don't feel like shit all the time. And then you had a really interesting way of talking about your dad and his voice in your head. Mm-hmm. And, I've been noticing how, like, those voices are still in my head. And I used to go, oh, well, mine is my mother. Mm-hmm. And that's Jeanette. And, screw it. I flipped the bird, by the way, for people. I gave the finger for those who are just listening on the podcast. It doesn't really matter that was Jeanette, that I still have that voice in my head. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you didn't need to eat a cookie yesterday. And it's her voice. Mm-hmm. So just having you say that out loud gives me some real perspective on it. It's like the same thing, like when you said that about your dad saying that to you, I'm like, how could you say that to a young person? How could you do that?
His favorite grade to give was an F-.
Oh.
With the hand gesture.
Yeah. And maybe from just hearing you share now and in your story, it's like I could say that to the voice in my own head. That voice in my own head has no business being so mean. Mm-hmm. So thank you for your story, and I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, thank you.
I'm Greg, and I'm an alcoholic. And
Hi, Greg.
I've been looking forward to hearing this. Well, I heard this week that you were going to be speaking.
Aww.
And I was telling my friend I was so glad that I was coming tonight, because from the first time I met you, you just seemed, on the one hand, you seemed very, you were working with the kids at that time. You seemed very focused on that. And yet you had a lightness about you. But I think it's probably that dual nature of how we can be fun over here while all of this. Because I know what it's like to work with people, and it can be very heavy at times, rewarding but heavy. But I've always enjoyed whenever you're around, and it means a great deal.
You've always been one of my favorites. Not that I have favorites, but yeah, you're one of them. I always just, I don't know, like I just always felt like there's just like a connection, like immediate. Yeah. Like, I don't know, like you made me at ease, like I had just known you forever. Yeah. And you were always just like ready to like be there and like have a nice time.
Yeah. Well, I feel the same. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm glad to hear you. And the part about your friends dying, I've had a lot of that in my life, and I understand what that can do to a person. And anticipatory grief is a very real thing. It hasn't happened yet, but you're already going through it in advance. And I think people need to be aware of that more, especially in these days. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Addendum, I completely forgot to tell you all that my nephew will be 5 years remission in April. And 5 years post bone marrow transplant in June. He's perfectly healthy, like totally normal 8-year-old boy. I forgot to mention that, so people were listening and were like, oh, what about the baby? He's healthy and happy, and I still love my life.
Oh, good.
Yay, good. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Emily.
It was so great to hear you speak and to learn more about you. You like you said, you show up to meetings when you need them. So I haven't had as much opportunity to talk to you as I'd like, but so this was really great. I think your dad has a lot to answer for, but I think you know that. So thank you for sharing. I know that can be really painful, especially when it comes to family. I'm very familiar with how Americans drink and behave when they're living overseas, so I could relate a lot to that part. And also, I miss champagne, but I don't like weddings, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Marley, it was just great to be here tonight with you. And I'm so excited that you're almost at 2 years. And I know that I can remember what that meant to me, and it means a lot. And I wish you the very best on this journey next month so that you make it. And I see your smiling face when you get a coin. Thank you.
Did anybody else feel like they wanted like something they wanted to? All right. Thank you, Marley.
Welcome.
Good job.
Thanks.